Well, in typical fashion, it took a lot longer than I expected to get the cross member, the engine mounts, and the oil pan out of Project Risky Business, my 1985 Porsche 928S. I'm going to take you through all of the bolts that are required to remove this cross member, the engine mounts, and what it took to get the oil pan out in this video. Stay tuned. I've completed some pretty difficult mechanical projects in my day, but this has been absolutely maddening. The notion that I had to take all of this out, the steering rack, the cross member, and some other ancillary items to get this oil pan out with its 30, that's right, 30 10mm bolts. It's just maddening. I've already taken you through the steering rack. I removed that in an earlier video. You can see what that is. And you can see I've cleaned it up as best as I can. The next task after the steering rack was removing this cross member. So it's easier to kind of take you through with some B-roll the bolts that are necessary to do this. There's a total of 14 bolts that you need to take out to get this cross member out. And that's not including where the motor mounts go in. The first pair I tackled were these mounts, upper mounts, that connect to pieces that come off of the unibody just underneath the engine. So those were long, and I had to use a wrench on one side, a ratchet on the other. On this side, I actually used the dowel pin to push out the bolt rather than sit there and waste time trying to unthread it. The next path I chose were disconnecting what looked like main bearing caps from the bottom of these. What fits into here and here is the lower wishbone. And so what makes the car even more complicated is this wishbone, this front suspension wishbone ties into this. So now that I've taken all of this apart, I definitely need a full front end alignment. These caps fit in here like that. You'll see that it's a rubber mount on the wishbone. And what I ended up finding is that I had to loosen the front end of those as well in order for this to get lowered. Next up were these bolts here that tie into welded steel gussets that are on the unibody underneath the car. So I took those out, and with that pair out, now the unit was loose. The last part of it were these 4 bolts here. And those were fairly straightforward to take out. At that point the unit was loose, but I still couldn't get it moved. So what I ended up having to do was actually loosen the front end of the lower wishbone to get enough clearance to pull this out and down. Okay, so the engine mount sits in the cross member like this. Once I had the lower cross member down, I actually found that I had to loosen these 4 bolts on either side to really be able to get this out. And I ended up taking off the nut on the bottom of the mounts as well to just give me enough play to remove the thing. So the engine mounts. What I have in my right hand is a new engine mount, and it's actually for a Volvo part that's supplied by 928S. And it's maybe hard to tell, but roughly you can see the height of the new part in my right hand versus the compression of this. This engine mount, probably smart that I did this. They look badly compressed, and everybody's telling me, in fact there's one comment on my last video, that I won't believe the difference in how smooth the engine and the ride is of the car once this is done. I hope that's meaningful, because this is a lot of work for this. And one of the things I I never noticed is when you hit the gas on this car, normally in a V8, the engine rotates a little bit. I never noticed that with this one since we got it running a year ago. So I'm looking forward to seeing, I've seen some other videos that once these are replaced, you see that kip going on the engine, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. But anyway, this is the oil pan. It looks substantial, but it's made out of cast aluminum, so it's relatively light. These bolts on the shallow end, believe it or not, this is an 8-quart pan in typical Porsche fashion. 30 10mm bolts are what hold this on. Taking out 20 of the bolts along this backside, the shallow end, was a 10-minute exercise with my cordless impact driver, as they came out really easily. In fact, some of them I noticed a few months ago were already loosened. I could hand loosen them, so that didn't help matters with the gasket on here. This middle section here, 6 bolts, wasn't too bad. Between a universal and a regular ratchet, I was able to get those out pretty quickly, there's not much interference here. The last 8 bolts, however, on the front side, are just a pain in the ass to get to. I can't put it any other way. I probably spent at least a half an hour on each one, slowly loosening these, and sometimes I just had to walk away. With my fat fingers, very little access. I'm debating whether I tried to avoid moving the air conditioning compressor and the god-awful alternator that I put back in last year after the full service on it. I got the thing out, but I think in order to properly tighten these 3 in particular, I'm going to have to just loosen the alternator and move it over so that I can get clear access in. As much as I'd like to, I'm not going to be able to get a torque wrench in on some of these, so I've got to basically use the torque here, figure out by feel how that's going to be. I'm no expert. I'm hoping maybe somebody's going to look, but when I look at the bottom end of the engine, it's a little beyond my job description, but I don't see any red flags. I see some other videos where people look at, I forget what the cylinder numbers are, you're supposed to look at the bearing scores. As far as I know, this car has about 125,000 miles on it. Looks good. The biggest thing I've got now is cleanup. I don't see any metal shavings in here. There's some sludge buildup on the inside of this oil pan, but I'm going to take care of that, get this all cleaned up. The main thing is to get clean, clean, clean. Luckily, the gasket came off clean. What was the gasket had come off clean. I don't know if this is silicone or if this is dried out. You can just see there was oil all along here. It was just not a good seal at all. All of this work just to get to this $35 gasket. What's going to be a little interesting is I noticed on the original gasket there are all these pockets between the bolts, and the silicone gasket that 928S sells, which they've moved to a different one, I'm a little bit concerned about. The original one was cork, so at some point that gasket had to be replaced. So I'm finding that this car probably was better maintained than I expected. So that's very good. Everything's disassembled. A couple things I have to order since doing this in order to get access is this oil sending unit probe. I'm going to order that and get that here in the next couple of days. If you've watched all of the videos on this car, in fact, here's the 30. I'll show the picture of all the bolts. You'll count. If you counted them, there's 29. This one here, there's one still stuck in here. I can't get it out. There's no room. I'm going to have to figure out how to do that because I do want to clean this up thoroughly. If you've watched the videos for the full service I did 1 year ago to almost the day, my buddy Nick helped me. I cleaned off this top side. So just in the past year, and not even 200 miles, just a few hours of runtime on this car, this was already just leaking out all over it. In my efforts to get to some of these bolts, I removed the oil sending unit, and as luck has it, there's a crush washer. Oh. There's a crush washer they use, so I'm going to get that on order so that I'm getting accurate readings on everything when I go to put this all back together. I guess this is day 7 of this project. As you can see, this oil pan is filthy, needs a lot of cleanup. I'm probably going to use the parts washer for something like this. The cross member is going to take some steam cleaning. I'm not going to bore you with a video on cleaning that. We'll just plan on the next video a week from now having all nice clean parts, and I'll start the reassembly. Hopefully I can get this all back together and not get the leaks that I saw on this. So one of the other things I discovered while doing this is the power steering pump, I suspect, is leaking. There is an oil cooler just under the power steering pump on the driver's side, and there's dirty fluid on the oil cooler lines that lead up to the radiator. However, I see even on the fan belt and the power steering pump, which I took out last year as part of the full service to gain access to the timing chain, it's clearly fully dirty again. Well, the good news is I thought maybe the oil pump seal we put in was leaking. I don't think that's the case. I think it's a question of all of this, and I think the power steering pump is in need of a rebuild. So I'm going to order that rebuild kit as well, as long as these other things. So that's going to be coming in the coming days. But that'll be a next project. That's not going to hold me up to have those things. I'll get most of this back together for my next update video, and we'll go from there. So it's easy to take things apart, a little bit more difficult to put them back together and not have any extra parts. And any extra parts on this are probably critical. I want to make sure, as you can see, I've laid everything out as best I can so that I remember where everything goes. So the next few days I'm just going to be spending cleaning up the cross member, this filthy oil pan. It'll be a combination of steam cleaning and the parts washer that's over in front of my garage. I won't bore you with another steam cleaning video. I will return with my next video. I'll show these parts nicely cleaned and ready for the install. So thanks for watching. If you're liking these videos and you haven't done so already, please press the subscribe button. So thanks for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day.